Well, welcome to Culture and Christianity. I'm delighted that I have a friend, but I think a voice for such a time as this. Jordan Rubin, welcome back.
It's good to be here.
It is always good to sit down with you. We were laughing before you came in. I said I was going to hand out Diet Cokes to everybody, but we don't drink those around here. So you've had some influence on me.
That's good to hear.
Let's just, you have kind of filled a lane, whether I'm sure to some degree it's intentional, but it's almost as if you're America's biblical health coach and had a tremendous impact. And I mean, you're not a newcomer to the arena any longer. You've got 20 plus years in the field. And so it's an exciting time. You started writing about this really from personal experience, the impact of diet on your health. And diet and God's grace restored you from some pretty dire places, Crohn's disease. So you got a new book out. How's that going? We're going to start with that.
It's been great. I am really blessed to just kind of sit back and see individuals take ownership of a message that was God's to begin with. And we were talking backstage. I can relate a little bit to somebody who's maybe a singer-songwriter and feels like they had a great hit coming out of the gate and then it took decades to repeat it. Or maybe a baseball player has a great rookie season and then takes 10, 11 years later for him to become an all-star. So this has been great because it's been the most successful book since The Maker's Diet. And it really is, it's almost 22 years difference. But when I think about it, Pastor, back when The Maker's Diet was written, The Passion of the Christ had just come out. And so culture and Christianity was a topic. And so I benefited from that, I feel like quite a bit because the mainstream was asking questions. And then now you fast forward and end of 2025 and now 2026, we've got the rise of conservatism in many ways. And with that, some of these ideas and decisions are being made by the higher ups. I don't necessarily mean God and the angels, although I'm sure they have something to do with it. We're seeing the greatest change in 60 years, perhaps, in food policy from the government. And I think for those of us who have been preaching this message for 20, 30 years, it's almost too good to be true, but it is hard to fathom because in the last 20, 30 years, inches have been gained, but then, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And now we're seeing things happen before our eyes that I believe will really bring people to better health. And I know when the government, the USDA, the FDA, when they make changes, in some cases, it doesn't mandate what you and I eat. But when you think about how this affects children in schools, how this affects our men and women in the armed forces, even in prisons. I mean, we don't like to think about that often, but what our inmates eat is important as well. And that's dictated by the food and dietary guidelines. So we're going to see changes in vending machines. We're going to see changes in military bases. I'm speaking to people. In fact, I spoke to the person responsible for all the nutrition for all the military bases, and they're making good changes. And one word that we hear come to the forefront is protein, prioritizing protein. And this really flies in the face of a lot of quote unquote conventional wisdom in the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years that really leaned more towards a plant-based diet. Meat is bad. Meat causes heart disease and cancer. But it's interesting in the books of Timothy, Paul warns in the latter days there will be doctrines of devils, and there will be preached the abstinence of eating meat that God created for us to enjoy. And some people will say, well, meat really means food and it's interchangeable. But I do believe there's been a vegetarian or plant-based doctrine coming out. There's been movies, all kinds of documentaries, including something called Knives versus Forks. Now, I would always say if I was in a fight, I'd rather have a knife than a fork. That's just me personally. But I think for those of us who really would struggle with the idea of eating meat made out of beans and grains or giving up some of the things that I think we intuitively crave, this is good news. So prioritizing protein is something I've preached for the entirety of my career in this space. And I think we're going to see, Pastor, a lot of our young people and even our older men and women become stronger as a result, because that's an area that can make a big impact.
Well, you say it casually, but I'm in the habit of saying God is moving. And people are always coming back to me going, well, what do you mean? And we tend to think of that in terms of traditional imaginations of revival. People coming to the altar and getting in baptisms. And I'm all for that. I think that's important. But when I say God is moving, when I see the AMA repudiate mutilating teenagers for gender modification, and it's supported by the American Association of Plastic Surgeons, God's moving in the earth, because those are liberal, woke organizations. And whatever caused that prompt, it's going to spare the lives of multiplied thousands of children. And I think we're watching that same thing happen with diet and nutrition. As you said, we've spent years making these tiny incremental back and forth negotiations. And now it's as if the spirit of God, the breath of God has blown through. You were Maha before Maha was popular. So maybe in a little more detail, they're making some real progress they've reprioritized the whole food pyramid. Things we were supposed to eat, we don't. And the things we weren't supposed to eat are good for us again.
Absolutely. And Pastor, you think about the 90s, and this was really the time of the fat-free craze. And I remember as a college student, I fell prey to that. Yeah. Well, the SnackWell foods, we're trying to convince ourselves that anything that's fat-free is good for us. And one of the major benefits of this new food pyramid upside down turning is that the understanding fat is not something that makes you fat. It actually satiates you. It helps boost your cellular health, your immune system, and they are going to start returning whole milk to schools. And if you think about it, which children are on the school breakfast and lunch program? Those that are lower on the socioeconomic chain. And so truly most of their nutrition comes from that. So if they're going to be consuming whole eggs instead of egg whites, which that's what God created to be eaten, whole milk instead of skim. And I have sort of a hierarchy in the Biblio diet of what milk I think is the best, and whole pasteurized, homogenized milk in a carton may not be perfect, but I think the understanding that real food is important. That's what Secretary Kennedy continues to say is eat real foods, avoid ultra-processed foods, and you will be healthier. And maybe they'll start with artificial colors, or maybe they'll talk about artificial sweeteners, and maybe it's seed oils, trans fats. But the idea is we are getting to the core that when we as a nation ate real foods, we were healthier, and diseases like diabetes and now obesity being called a disease were not costing us trillions upon trillions of dollars in mid and end of life care. So I think the idea of protein being good for us, fats not being the villain, that's going to automatically make us more satiated. We're going to eat less ultra processed foods because junk begets junk. That goes for sin. That goes for food. And I can't tell you, Pastor, how many thousands of times people have said, is it a sin to eat junk food? Is it a sin to eat what the Old Testament says not to eat? I'm not going to answer that question because it's always a trap. Jesus avoided a few questions too. I think that was pretty interesting that there was an idea that there were thousands of questions that were asked to Jesus and he answered a few of them. But one thing that I will say is you can make your life less potent, you can make it shorter, and you can make those around you suffer as a result of your own illness by forsaking your health and not really understanding that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And all of Paul's messaging around that is not simply sexual sin. It certainly is that. But I believe there's going to be a revolution. I would love to tell you it's starting with the church. I don't see that. It's actually starting from the outside, but I am seeing the church become fast adopters this time. Whereas years ago, I was knocking on the door and nobody really answered. It was few and far between. But now it seems like almost everybody, no matter what walk of life, is sensitive to improving their health, wanting to live longer, and even equating it with serving God, which I like to say that Romans 12:1 and 2 are very central to this message of physical stewardship, and that we offer our bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable, pleasing unto God, as our spiritual act of worship, depending on which translation. And Romans 12:2 is great for all of us today more than ever. No longer be conformed to this world, the ways, the wisdoms, the pattern, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and then we can choose what God's perfect will is for us. I mean, I don't know how we read those two verses and we don't make changes and become more like Jesus.
You don't have to look far to see that our economy is in real turmoil. Our nation is $37 trillion in debt. Inflation rates made it hard to buy and sell a house, even a car. We're all feeling it. When you go to the grocery store and you spend an extra $1 or $2 on every item, that gets personal in a hurry. Well, the most important thing we can do during uncertain times is to invest ourselves in knowing God better. Read His Word, pray. That's the only place we're really going to find stability we need for the disruption that I'm pretty certain is ahead of us. Beyond that, it's just plain wise to make the best decisions possible in our daily lives with our investments. When you think of all the options out there, gold is an investment that has stood the test of time. That's why I work with Preserve Gold. They've treated me with honesty, integrity, kindness every step of the way. They're offering a free wealth protection kit, and all you need to do is text ALLEN, that's ALLEN, to 50505. As a bonus, you'll get up to $15,000 in free gold and silver with a qualified purchase. Go ahead and text them today. No, I love that verse in Romans 12, because to be transformed is to be changed in potential. And what you're describing changes the potential of our lives. You've said to me in other places to go to the grocery store and eat from the outside, where the real food is, and to stay out of the hyper-processed stuff. And I think keeping it simple, sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. You co-founded Ancient Nutrition with Dr. Axe in 2016?
Yep.
And I know a big part of what you have brought to the table from that is your proteins and multi-collagen and now multi-protein, because you recognize it's just hard to eat enough protein.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about that and what your objective is and why that's so important.
Well, it was interesting. Before this program, I was on with a major TV network, and I'm going to be appearing talking about more protein. And when I share with an audience, this is an aged audience. So I had 3 callers last time I was on, females, 75, 77, and 82. Now, praise God, they were healthy, seemingly gardening and doing different things, but they don't want to make a 10-ounce steak, whether it's preparation or just having the desire to consume it to get their 60 grams of protein. They don't want to eat 5 eggs to get their 30 grams of protein. Now, I'm not saying they won't eat any of that, but they want to eat oatmeal, and they want to have a cracker or a cookie. So at the end of the day, if you're a 70-year-old woman, I was also having a conversation with my sister about my mom who's 75, and she fell and broke her toe. And I'm just thinking, my mom needs to exercise more, but she also needs to eat more protein to build muscle, because that's the integrity of our body. It's really built out of protein. And so my mom's relatively small, but she should be consuming 120 grams of protein a day. And I know for a fact that she's going to have a hard time doing that. So if she can consume a product like multi-protein, and then if you mix it in milk, for example, that's 35 grams of protein or close to it in one glass, and it tastes good like a milkshake. So if you need to do 120 grams, or you and I, more like 200, and it sounds easy, but it's really not. I'm being more intentional this year trying to document that. But we get busy, you want to grab something, and there's not always those options. And I believe food is key, but when you can't get the amount of nutrition, in this case protein, from your diet, it's great to know that you could have a smoothie or a shake or two, and you get 35, 60, 70 grams. Then you say, well, I can manage a 6-ounce chicken breast at lunch, and then I can eat some spaghetti and meat sauce for dinner. But so many of us have been very deficient, in my opinion, in protein for too long. And I know there's diverging opinions on what we should do, but the general consensus in science and within now our government is that we should be consuming 1 gram of protein per pound of desired or healthy body weight.
1 gram of protein per 1 pound of body weight.
Desired. So if you're somebody who is overweight or obese and you weigh 300 pounds, you don't need 300 grams of protein.
Right.
But for you and me, we're going to be in the 180 to 220 gram range if we follow that methodology. And I know both of us exercise. We try to lift weights. I'm actually lifting weights, and we try to pretend we don't when people say you look really good, right? Just so I just natural. I rolled out of bed like this. So if you practice
I was at the gym this morning at 6
yeah,
o'clock.
There you go. If you practice resistance training, you play a sport like pickleball, whatever, you need even more protein. And protein doesn't just come in meat and eggs. It comes in the form of collagen, which we used to get from broths, from gelatin or the Jell-O dessert that we used to have as kids. That's collagen protein. And that is the building blocks of our joints, ligaments, tendons, skin, hair, and nails. Whereas the eggs and the meat and the dairy and the nuts and seeds, that builds our muscle. So you got to have that balance. And what we wanted to do with multi-protein is take the guesswork out, because people today eat chicken breast. We eat cuts of beef or ground beef. We're not consuming broths and soups, which used to be the basis of our sauces.
Right.
I say this all the time. When someone comes out of a surgery in a hospital or they're convalescing, they're given something that resembles chicken broth, because who knows what it is now, and Jell-O. That's what they get. And in the old days, our ancestors knew that those proteins were easy to digest and they would help restore our health. There's a special type of protein or amino acids in these collagens that are easy on the digestive tract, they're easy on the liver, and they help you build back your integrity quicker. They help you heal faster. And so I think we're going to see restaurants offering high protein meals with a very pointed recommendation for how many grams, because we don't know when we go out to eat, but now we're seeing high protein bowl at this location, and there's apps that help us track the protein. And obviously AI can help you design a 150 gram high protein diet. But I think, Pastor, if someone were to say, how do I know if this works? Give it a try, go for 6 weeks, count your protein grams, learn what's in what, because we should know. By general rule, if you take your hand and the palm of my hand in meat, chicken, or fish is between 20 and 30 grams, depending on the cut or if there's bone in it, et cetera. An egg is 6 grams. I like duck and goose eggs. Those can be more. And then dairy's 8 grams per cup or 8 ounces. Cottage cheese is having a resurgence. In fact, cottage cheese is so popular, it's selling out all over the place because 1 cup is 20 plus grams of protein. Wow. So now grandmothers are getting excited because their cottage cheese and peaches is something that they like to eat. So when you start to learn, knowledge is power, and you can construct a diet that is based on protein. And if someone were to do this for 6 weeks, as I mentioned, I think they're going to see the general shape of their body change. If you add some resistance training, or maybe try to walk 5,000 or 10,000 steps a day, which there's also ways your phone will count that automatically, whether you like it or not. That's what I say to someone. You want to change your fitness, walk 5,000 or 10,000 steps and try to eat about a gram of protein per pound of desired body weight, even if you fumble around with the words like I am.
I think with diet, the challenge is, I think all of us like instant results. I go to the gym one day and I expect to be transformed by it. And if it's your first day, all you do is get sore.
Oh, yeah. Or if it's your 100th day, because I got to tell you, I was doing some Bulgarian split squats, Pastor, and my glutes were really sore. Darn those Bulgarians, what do we do to them?
I call it the leg flu. Yes. After you have a heavy leg day, your legs feel like they have the flu. But with diet, it's going to take a bit of time. I like your 6-week invitation because it takes a bit of discipline. And the initial changeover, you have to break some bad habits, and your body will complain a little bit. You have to learn you have to ignore some cravings and build some new habits and patterns. It's the same with spiritual change. And it just doesn't happen. We all want a quick prayer. Like Naaman wanted the prophet to come out and clap his hands over his head. And he said, no, actually, you got to go dip yourself in the river a bit. And I think that's what you're describing. My grandparents, they had a garden when they were in their 70s. I mean, it was normal to them. They were accustomed to raising their own food, and even the work that went into raising it was a part of their health.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And they had a different kind of health and strength that is common today. So I think what you're inviting us towards is something that has been a part of our journey. We've just gotten too busy or too distracted, or so it's really common sense that's not common anymore.
Well, and the saying necessity is the mother of invention is really apropos, because I'm teaching people that they should be eating organ meats, so liver and heart and kidney. But anyone that I talk to who is my parents' generation had liver and onions every single week, because what were they going to do with the liver when you had an animal that was butchered? They had bone broth or chicken soup, because what were you going to do with the part of the animal? You're not going to waste it. You're going to use it. And now we're saying that liver and bone broth are superfoods when they were just part of standard fare back in the day. And now we're seeing such amazing results by adding these back to our diet. But when you talk to people, no matter where they come from, South America, Middle East, Africa, they consumed certain special foods during special times. I had a friend ask me a question. Hey, we're trying to get pregnant. What should I consume? And if you study the healthiest cultures in the world, the indigenous cultures, even today, when couples were of marrying age and reproductive age, they consumed higher fat, higher nutrient foods. So they would consume organs. If they lived near oceans and streams, they would consume fish eggs or fish roe. These were high in vitamin A, vitamin D, certain fatty acids, egg yolks. So these would help build fertility. Today, we are in a crisis of fertility to the point, Pastor, where we would be declared a borderline endangered species based on how low our, let's say, unassisted fertility rates are. Now, we got enough people maybe, but try telling that to somebody who dreamed of having a child and is in a 5-10 year battle with infertility. And I would say this, in my experience, coaching people back to health, there's greater issues with infertility than ever. And I would say the average couple has a hard time conceiving. And I would also say this, and we don't think about this much because it's a certain portion of the population, the average female doesn't produce enough breast milk to feed a child, her infant child. I just formulated a product to help with lactation. And I'm thinking this can't be a very big market, but I know it is, because I've talked to several young people recently where they didn't have enough milk for their child, and in some cases zero. Like we're seeing zero milk production. That's all related to the nutrition of the mom, because how can you grow another human being if you're not satisfactorily nutrified, if you will?
Okay, I'm going to keep it simple for a minute, because this topic is confusing. I think I've often said that I think diet is like fashion. It feels like, I'm not saying good advice, but the advice changes. You know, don't eat red meat, do eat red meat. Don't eat eggs, do eat eggs. I mean, it always, so that I usually kind of just lived by the notion of moderation was your better plan. But what you're inviting us towards, eating more red meat, is, I don't know that it's contradictory, but it's against the conventional wisdom that's come from the healthcare profession for quite a while. And so I want to be sure everybody is hearing what you're saying, that the new recommendations, now they're coming from Secretary Kennedy, and the establishment has changed their tone. But that actually eating red meat is good for you. It's not something to be avoided. Upping our protein intake will make us healthier. Doing it intentionally, purposefully over time will help us lose weight, not gain weight, that our numbers will get better. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are. And I would tell people this is how simple it is. If everybody listening ate a whole avocado a day, and I'm talking about a small Hass avocado, not a Florida avocado, there's some big ones, that alone, even though it is very high in fat, is going to be great for your heart, great for your digestion, great for your skin. That's just one of probably 50 bits of advice you would get from the Biblio diet or following a plan that God created for your body. And red meat is certainly a part of that. Pastor, I've eaten red meat every day maybe 300 days a year, maybe 320 for 30 years. And I raised my kids on red meat. And if I would rewind generations, the only reason that they wouldn't eat red meat every day is if they couldn't afford it. They couldn't find it, but they're always eating meat. And I have a Jewish family, so I hear stories of, they would make chicken soup from a chicken that was breathing and pecking like hours ago. And they made their disgusting Yiddish fish dish called gefilte fish from carp that were in the bathtub.
It's like fish
apparently
jello.
For hours. Yeah, fish jello. Think about that. And my mom had a name for the jello. They called it driggle. So whoever lost the bet ate the driggle. But point is, people throughout history would always build their meals around protein. And I'm inviting people to do that. I use that term a lot, and I like it. I'm inviting people to build your plate around protein. Do I believe in vegetables? Absolutely. But protein is making up the structural parts of your body. Broccoli does not build muscle. It doesn't build bone. It doesn't build connective tissue, your ligaments, your joints, your tendons. But protein and protein substances will do that. And I will tell people that the same way avocado is amazing, whole eggs are amazing. The egg yolk is such a perfect creation. It gives you everything you need to create life, because an egg yolk does create life. And we went throughout the 90s throwing away the yolk and eating egg whites, which have protein but little else. So if I would tell people to get the most nutritious foods on the planet, think of fatty fruits and vegetables like avocado and olives, amazing protein sources like red meat. And if you're going to eat chicken, believe it or not, the dark meat's healthier than the white. We've, of course, changed our habits because we want to have all white meat because it's better tasting and you can make nuggets out of it. But dark meat's healthier than light. It's got more minerals. It's got more healthy fats. And then you look at some of these fattier foods like egg yolk and organ meats and things of that nature, and they don't always taste great. That's why there's supplements. But I prioritize protein, and I personally look at vegetables and fruits as condiments or side dishes. And I know some people are saying, well, you need to make your plate about mostly vegetables and a little bit of meat. If you do that, it is very difficult to get enough protein to be strong and healthy as you age. And nowadays, you don't have to go to the Cleveland Clinic to find out how your longevity markers are. They are proving a correlation between grip strength. And I'm talking about a handshake, not some crazy contraption. Or can you do a wall sit? Can you hang from a pull-up position? Do you know how many people can't do that when they're 75? But here's what's worse. Do you know how many people can't do that when they're 17? I mean, we're talking about a time in our nation where more than 50% of military eligible men and women can't pass the fitness test.
Almost everybody I know wants to be healthy or healthier. And I think most of us would like it to happen to us by accident, but that hasn't been my experience. So what do we do in a world where there's so many options and diets seem to be like fashion trends? They change with every season. How do we respond? Well, I want to tell you about something that I trust, something that has worked in my life. Ancient Nutrition gives you a whole menu of supplements, sources for protein and collagen that I have found made a difference in my life. You know, I decline most sponsorship invitations, but this isn't something that is just an invitation to be a sponsor for something. I've actually used it in my life and it's made a difference. Jordan Rubin happens to live in the Nashville area, so he and I have become friends long before I was doing this podcast. And his coaching has helped me lead a healthier life. And I have found those Ancient Nutrition supplements to be very valuable, whether it's the multi-collagen or now the new multi-protein. It's hard to eat enough protein sometimes as you age to maintain the muscle that we want to maintain. And those supplements have been very helpful for me. They've been gracious enough to give those of you who are listeners to our program, if you'll use the code FUEL26, you'll get a 26% discount site-wide on Ancient Nutrition. That's ancientnutrition.com. Let's make choices to be healthier, and maybe we can limit the pharmaceuticals we'll be dependent upon. That would be a God thing. God's moving in the earth, and we can be a part of it by what we put on our fork and not just the pills we take. And some of this is available to everybody, because it's been about almost a year and a half now when you and I were together in an event, and I said, I want to get a little healthier. I said it kind of casually, and you were in my office the next week. But you brought me what you shared today, but it's in simple things like stay away from diet sodas, limit the chemicals that you're exposing yourself to, eat real food. And so I did. I just started plugging that stuff in. And, it didn't happen in a day or a week, but my habits changed, and the things you crave start to change. And I'm kind of a notorious junk food person, and I've laid most of that down, unless it's just some rare occasion. And I think for the people listening to know that you can make a real impact on your health and stop being dependent on pharmaceuticals, and what pill I'm going to take. And if you combine that with faith and you get to know God, now you really do have a dynamic that can transform your health. God isn't our healer absent our involvement. I think he responds to us when we cooperate with the common sense and the wisdom he's given us.
That's totally true.
And I love the way you incorporate those things into your book.
Yeah, I'm smiling, Pastor, because I had this thought: if the congregation or congregations, but specifically the online and in-person congregation that you serve, if they changed their habits and just their breakfast eating, you would have to change what you tell them to put down when they're standing up to quote the scripture, because it wouldn't be donuts. It wouldn't be, Pop-Tarts. It would be put down your steak and eggs. Now, Pastor, if you do say that, I'll smile quite a bit. If you're watching today online, put down your steak and eggs and get out your notepad. But the truth is, if people switch their breakfast, that's just one example, to something that is absent of sweets and starches, that's going to set them up for a really good day. Now, you and I have talked before. I don't necessarily believe you need to eat breakfast in the morning. In fact, I practice what people would call intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, and I challenge you to do that too, because for a lot of us, especially men, it's such a good way for us to lose fat and really become more alert and active. But if you're a breakfast eater, if you wake up in the morning hungry and you eat something that is protein-centric, you're going to set yourself up for a great day, and you could get 20, 30, 40, 50 grams of that protein you need. I talked about you and I between 180 and 220 grams. You get a good chunk out of that out of the way, and you're going to be full. You're not going to be starving. If you eat a donut, you're going to want more of something similar a few hours later. And that's why, again, we get back to the different products we create at Ancient Nutrition. If you're going to eat something sweet in the morning, let's put 26 grams of protein in it, and let's put it from meat and healthy dairy protein and collagen, all the things we're talking about, so that someone can do something fast, because speed is everything for us today, and they can start off on the right foot.
The intermittent fasting and the time window in that can change, if I understood. I think when we talked, you said like a 4-hour window. But you can narrow that or expand that. It depends. That's the other thing I think you do that is so helpful. You give people the flexibility to do what makes sense. You don't motivate people with guilt and shame. And I'm grateful for that. You invite them towards some better behaviors and practices, but you allow them to make that work within the confines of their reality, because our families and circumstances and jobs are different. But that's not a heavy lift to restrict your eating to a 4-hour window a day. That's a pretty, on the discipline scale, that's not a heavy lift. I've done long-term fasts, and that's a completely different bar. If you've got a 4-hour window where you can eat real food, that's available to almost everybody.
And Pastor, I tell people if you could do it for 8 hours a day, you're going to actually improve your health for the most part, because we tend to go to sleep late. So people are eating at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and then they'll start by grabbing something at 6 in the morning. So if you think about it, they are eating for 18 hours a day, because it's really about how much time between your first bite of food and your last. And your body cleanses and detoxifies during the off period. So it's really, think of it as building and cleansing. And we need that repair mechanism. And so I personally believe, for me, that eating in a more restricted time period makes me hungrier for healthier foods. And I feel like my body utilizes them better because I'm biologically hungry, not just, Mom, I'm hungry, which just means I want the next taste to stimulate me to something else. And one thing we're doing this year in our family, and I think it works really well, we are trying to be a little more disciplined during the week when we're busy, because it's easier to do that. Really prioritize protein, good veggies, low sugar fruits, think berries. And then on the weekends, I have an 18-year-old daughter who is an aspiring pastry chef, it seems, and she just goes at it. Now, always with healthy ingredients, but she made, Pastor Allen, everyone's going to be excited, but she made a homemade ice cream sandwich. Now, I can't tell you how long it's been since I've had an ice cream sandwich. We're talking about the one that you got in grade school. And she made it out of an ancient grain flour called einkorn. She made the cookies, and we got local raw milk and with real eggs and made old-fashioned ice cream. So I want people to know this is a delicious diet. But when we're working, when we're studying, when we're busy during the week, we eat to live. We don't live to eat. But then you do reward yourself. And I think even throughout history, you can see in the feasts of the Bible and different times you did that. But there was always fasting involved. There was always some level of sacrifice. And so if somebody were to say, Jordan, boil it down for me on the diet side in 60 seconds, I would say, shrink your eating window to 8 hours a day. Count your protein. Try to get 1 gram of protein per pound of desired body weight or healthy body weight. What do you weigh when you were 21 or 18? So 1 gram of protein times that. If it's a female, it could be 140. If it's a male, it could be 180, 200. And eat real food, prioritizing that protein and healthy fat 5 days a week. Be a little more disciplined. I don't want to say strict, but be a little more disciplined. And on the weekends, within reason, within foods that are real, have delicious meals you can look forward to. Maybe I was 2 minutes, but that alone, Pastor, would solve the obesity epidemic. Most type 2 diabetes would be gone. And a lot of our pain, inflammation, depression, and anxiety, and our children's inability to concentrate and focus would be greatly improved.
The question we always ask on our podcast is, what can we do? And that's a perfect, what can we do response. We're not powerless. And again, I think if you combine that with faith and turning your heart towards God and unloading the things that will spiritually disrupt your wellness, that is a powerful dynamic for a better future for all of us. So your book is the Biblio Diet. They can get it wherever they get books.
Yes.
Online or otherwise. If they're interested in your supplements and your multi-protein, how do they find that?
Well, they can go to ancientnutrition.com, and I know that there's a code or a link on the screen, and they can not only save on multi-protein, but we have other proteins such as multi-collagen protein or bone broth protein. Pastor, we decided to take proteins and other key superfoods that would normally take you hours to make or days and create them in very tasty, simple, quick, convenient options so that everyone could get them, because not everybody knows how to cook, wants to cook, has the means to do it. And so we want to take the concept of fast food and make it healthy so that you can boost what you're doing, because it is very satisfying to know, hey, I'm going to aim for a goal and I hit it with a little help from my friends. In this case, my protein friends.
Well, I have found the supplements to be helpful. As much as I enjoy being at a table with family or friends, because there's something nourishing in that. And even the preparing of the food, I think, is a community event like you described with your daughter. But there are times when our schedules just don't make that real. And so that's where your supplements to me have been really important in my own journey. So I have found them to be helpful. Thank you for doing the hard work so I can skip those days some days and get the benefit without all the effort.
Well, the Word of God says, to whom much is given, much is required or expected. And so it's been a joy to see people receive benefits from what I have learned through hardship. And I think I always say this, when I was battling Crohn's disease and later cancer, I didn't want to see the doctor with the greatest amount of credentials or degrees. I didn't care where the individual graduated from medical school. What I was desperate to hear was someone who would say, I've been where you are and I have overcome, and it's going to be okay. You're going to have a family. You're going to have a great life if you will just navigate it this way. But instead it was really do this, do that, or else. And it was take this medicine, get this surgery, or you can't have children, and all the ways of putting someone in a box. What I want people to know is no matter where you're at, and Pastor, I hear and see messages every day of people that are very ill. Right before I came on this program, I got a text message about 2 individuals with very advanced cancer that have been given very short time to live and need help. I always think to myself, rewind 5, 10, or 15 years ago, we could have made a more significant impact. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you're listening and you're blessed to not have an itis, which, Pastor, who is that anymore? You can adopt these principles. Not only will you reap the benefits, but I think your generations will benefit from the health knowledge you impart to them. And I will tell you just a side note, the focus you've had at the church around the table has been something that we're very passionate about. And having teenage and 20-something children, I really cherish it. We're incorporating that with healthy eating, with the elements of communion and toasting olive oil as the Holy Spirit. So we really wanted to make 2026 count. And if someone's listening or watching, it's not too late for them to start these amazing God-centered habits, because somebody on the other side is going to want what you have. And that's the ultimate way to share the good news.
Amen. Well, Jordan Rubin, thank you for your time today. Come back and give us an update.
I will. Thank you for having me, as always.
And if you're listening, don't just listen to this. You know, the putting your house on a solid foundation is doing it. So start where you are. It's not hopeless. You start with the part you could hear today, put it into practice. We can get healthier. I don't think it's an accident that most of the commercials on evening television are trying to sell us pharmaceuticals. Let's start to eat in such a way that we can bring health to our lives with God's good help. God's a healer, and your body was designed to heal. If we will cooperate with God, He will bring restoration to us. You brought hope to us today, Jordan. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me today. Before you go, please like the podcast and leave a comment so more people can hear about this topic too. If you haven't yet, be sure and subscribe to Alan Jackson Ministries YouTube channel and follow the Culture and Christianity podcast. You can do that on Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Together, let's learn how to lead with our faith. We can change our culture. I'll see you next time.